right. Okay. So it's a pleasure to be here. So very quickly, my name is Yat. I'm chairman and co-founder of Animoca Brands. I'm going to talk about our perspectives on the future of tokens. Very quickly, a little bit about us. We're probably known as one of the biggest investors in Web3. We have over 540 portfolio companies, so we do care about the future of Web3 a lot, and we're also builders in the space. But very quickly, let's talk about the space. So earlier in the year, the World Economic Forum actually talked about whether the cryptocurrency era is about to begin. And I would change that a little bit and say, actually, it's really about the era of tokenization. The future of tokens has come upon us in a very big way. And just before I explain exactly what we think about tokens, let me just explain what we think is actually one of the most valuable assets in the world today. And that is our network effect. And the network effects today are actually driven by our data. We as users are actually creating information, they create knowledge, and then they create networks. And these networks exist on things like Instagram, or Facebook, or TikTok, or any of these platforms. And then actually what happens, they become a network effect, and they create some kind of value. And these companies that own the networks are the most valuable companies in the world today. Whether this is Apple, whether this is Google, TikTok, Facebook, or Meta, X, you name it, these companies are the biggest ones, because they own the networks that we use. You don't own your followers on Instagram, they own it. Now, this is where Web3 is interesting, because actually, before I go there, the value of the networks, and this is how we can think about token networks too, comes from the value generated from each connection. So the strength of the network is you join the network not because of Facebook, right? You join the network because of your friends or a company on Facebook. So that's the value. And by the way, this is also true for tokens. If you join the Ethereum network or the Solana network or the Mocha network, you don't join it because necessarily of one entity. You join it because there's other people building on top of it because you find that attractive or interesting. And that's actually the power of a network effect, and that's where the growth of the value comes. So when we talk about networks in time, and this is really thinking about how we think about the future of tokens, Web 1, which is the traditional web, and then Web 2, which is the social web, and then Web 3, which is the web of ownership. The big difference is that you can think in simple terms that Web 1, we had websites as a way to draw attention and to create network effects that were owned by the companies. And in Web 2 was an extension, but it became more social. And in Web 3, through tokens, basically we create a way in which we can share and own that attention as end users. What we're saying is that you can think of Web 3 tokenization very similar to websites 20, 30 years ago. In other words, there's not going to be one major token or 10 major tokens or 1,000 major tokens. There's going to be millions and millions of tokens, just as there are millions and millions of websites and blogs today. That's how we see the future of tokenization for all sorts of things. It doesn't have to be valuable. It doesn't have to be big, but there's going to be many. Small restaurants will have tokens. Large corporations will have tokens. Everyone will tokenize something of some sort. So talking quickly around the point of ownership. So when you have tokens that you can now own, when you can own a piece of the network, they become assets. So unlike in Web 2, where you're renting the network, they don't belong to you. In Web 3, you own the asset. So when you own Ethereum or when you own Mocha or Sand tokens, you actually own a piece of the network and you get to benefit from the growth of that network. So they become assets, which means they become capital assets, which means they have the ability to form some type of value for you and the network and the companies involved. What's interesting about tokens is because it's a capital asset, it has embedded not just a utility, but also a financial value right from the start. So in Web 2, for instance, if you're using a network like Instagram, you have no financial benefit when you use it. You could have 1 million followers on Instagram, and sure, you can make money doing sponsorships, but the network doesn't reward you directly because you don't own it. The only beneficiary of the network is the owner, which is Facebook. Or if you're using Apple, it's Apple, the company. But in Web 3, because of the ownership of the token and the fact that it has a capital formation and has a financial element that's tied to it, remember, the token has a price, right? And you can sort of have it through that ownership. There's an ability for it to go up or go down. Basically, you have both, meaning that the number of followers, if you want to take it this way, as a form of attention, can have value in the same way that, that the sort of equity construct could have in a company. So tokens both have utility and financial value embedded in them, which is unique. And it allows you for the first time to own a piece of the network. These network effects that we see can be represented in many ways. They can be cultural, like NFTs. They can be economic, like just tokens and meme coins or stable coins. They can be social, they can be symbolic. It doesn't matter if it's a non-fungible token, if it's an RWA, which is a real-world asset token, or if it's basically a meme coin. They all essentially sort of have a way in which you have a network effect that you can partake in them. And there's a value formation that happens because now the networks are capital assets, which again, pre-blockchain was not possible before. So let me talk a little bit about some ways to think about this. In the Web2 world, the network effect is mostly driven by advertising. So earlier this year, roughly almost 800 billion, so close to $1 trillion was spent in digital advertising, in search and social media. That is the revenue that companies are generating by owning the network effect. In Web 2, that's basically advertising spent. In Web 3, it comes in the form of value of the network, but instead of paying advertising, you get it in the form of airdrops. I don't know how many of you have participated in the airdrops, whether this is a Pengu airdrop, or whether this is a ApeCoin airdrop, or whether this is a Uniswap airdrop or a Mocha airdrop. It doesn't matter. The point is that when you receive these airdrops, you're actually receiving a part of the network, and they're advertising it, but it's a way in which that advertising is shared. You as the end user now receive value because you own a piece of the network. This was not possible before. You do not receive value when Facebook makes money on advertising. You receive nothing. You just create content, and they make money. In Web3, you get it in the form of advertising through these airdrops, right? And that's the difference. It's still the same thing. It's still trading attention. It's still a value that's attached to it, except here, you are the owners as opposed to the platform. So in the last 4 years, close to $50 billion worth of these airdrops were given to community. It's the largest wealth transfer, when you think about it, over the last few years for regular users who are not owners of a large corporation or a network. But it's very small when you consider that just in 1 year last year, the total advertising spend was close to $1 trillion at roughly $800 billion. So we can basically see where the growth chart can come. And if you're a user, of course you would much rather receive rewards yourself, since you're the target, than basically just the platform. So market prices, because the tokens have a price, they essentially become a way in which you can measure the market attention. Right? Similar to market prices, whether it's a stock price or whether it's a commodity, it informs you. You know how to allocate resources because you know whether the price is high or low. It affects consumer behavior because you can decide whether you want to make a purchase or not. They signal information. Tokens signal information in exactly the same way. It's like an open poly market. What it means is that even if a token comes up in value and goes up and down, it doesn't just inform you of the project, it informs you of the attention it has at that moment in time. It signals information. When the Trump token goes, we can like it or dislike it, but the point is, because of his attention, there's a value attached to it. It could be 5 minutes, it could be 5 years, right? But they all inform you of something, and you will make a decision based on what you see. Sort of a story that happened to me myself is, like I'm on TikTok, so I don't really know Chill Guy. I have no idea. But I talked to my kids about Chill Guy precisely because of tokens, because I learned about them. So I kind of became cool for my kids for a small period of time. But more importantly, it's another way in which information can be shared and be delivered. So it signals information, and tokens are indicators of that. So let me just quickly give an example of how we think about the market and how you might think about it in forms of price attention and what that means. So in 2024, AI tokens did very well, and gaming tokens did very badly, right? Broadly speaking. But people often criticize the gaming industry. You say, oh, there's no utility, there's not that many users compared to AI. But the reality is that last year, actually gaming really increased, in large part because of TON and because of other types of ecosystems. We had close to 7 million daily active users playing Web3 games. That's a large number compared to where they were a year before, 2 years before, 3 years before. So the gaming industry actually grew, but the token prices went down, whereas the AI tokens all went up, but the usage of the AI tokens does not compare to the gaming tokens. So what happened? So what actually happened wasn't the fact that the individual projects did poorly. Actually, they were growing mostly. What actually happened was, broadly speaking, the gaming industry was flat. People were laying people off. People thought post-COVID gaming was going to grow, but actually over the last 3 years, it's been mostly flat. Right? So the gaming industry has not grown. And so as a result, it has affected also the sentiment around basically what happens in Web3, because again, as I shared earlier, token prices are a form of attention. right? They tell you not only what's happening in the Web3 gaming industry, they tell you what's happening in the industry broadly. They give you information. In the same way that Polymarket tells you which bet to take, which side to take, it basically tells you what's happening in the market as a whole, from a consumer sentiment, whether it's a meme coin, whether it's a project, whether it's a utility. So we have two major things happening in the gaming industry that I think will change that narrative from an attention standpoint. So we believe that towards the end of the year, gaming will be very strong and will have an impact, again, from a signaling price point. The first one is a Switch 2 launch, which will launch in June of this year. Nintendo has not launched a new game in about 8 years, a new console in 8 years, as there's a new Mario Brothers and so on, which means revenue will grow, game development grow, funding investment will probably grow, and this was one of the biggest successful launches from a console standpoint. So that's one driver for this year. But the biggest driver we think that's going to drive the gaming narrative for this year is GTA 6. If you know anyone who plays games, they haven't bought a console yet, they will buy one because of GTA 6. There's nothing bigger in the gaming industry than GTA 6. In fact, from a cultural standpoint, it's probably the biggest thing the world will see in quite a while. And of course, because GTA 6 allows people to run their own servers, a lot of people are already talking about running crypto on these servers. And if there's one game where, basically crypto fits very well, it's probably GTA 6. The point being that these are some of the major trigger events that will drive narrative, not specifically because it's only on Web3, but because it's a macro event. Just like how it was AI before, or it's the metaverse before that, or basically sort of finance broadly speaking. So I just have a couple of minutes. So I wanted to just cover a little bit on some final use cases that we like. So I'm not going to talk about the use cases you already know, about gaming, about DeFi. These are all important. I want to talk about a few use cases as well when you talk to people in the space around Web3 use cases your parents can understand and that we can be proud of as an industry. Because while I just informed you that meme coins and all these are information important, you all understand that, often, I don't know how many people of you have gone and talked to your friends about crypto or tokenization, and they all look at you kind of weird and say, why do I need this? Even though it's such a positive sentiment from a political standpoint, most people are still skeptical about it. So I want to give you some use cases that you can use if you go home and talk to your family and you want to onboard them to Web3. So I have sort of 3 use cases to show. First one you already know, which is basically stablecoins, very easy. But now stablecoins are coming with the banks in place as well. So meaning, in our case, we have a partnership with Standard Chartered to basically create a stablecoin, but expect with the stablecoin regulation in the US, major banks in the US to also issue their own stablecoin. This means payments are faster, more efficient, no SWIFT transfers, all that kind of stuff. Very clear use cases as a business. And in fact, in this new age of tariffs, may be much needed as ways in which you can perhaps move value around. So that's an example of a real-world asset. But the other one that we did actually about 1.5 years before was unlocking real-world assets with fine arts or valuable items. So this is the Empress Katerina. It is an expensive Stradivarius violin. And it was tokenized. And it has allowed the ability for people to own a share in that. And these are assets you can't normally own. But actually, if you explain to people who don't understand tokenization the value of these things, and say, hey, you know what, you appreciate the value of this art or this item, but you could now own a piece of that through tokenization at scale, because it couldn't just be owned by 1,000 people, 100 people, but maybe by 1 million people if it made sense. Again, real-world assets is a way in which you connect people so they understand what it means. And again, once you have a token, you create a network. Stablecoins, even though they're supposed to be stable in value, still are a network because they have a social component. Which brings me to the last use case I want to demonstrate, which is around education, what we have with Open Campus and EDU. And in this particular case, about student finance. And it's a case that I think is really interesting because we do lack very strong narratives in Web3 about why it matters. Students are today paying some of the highest interest rates, particularly in Southeast Asia, sometimes up to 17%. It's a close to $3 trillion market, which is expected to grow by $6 trillion in the course of the next sort of 9 to 10 years. Students face many barriers to get it, and it's a barrier for basically personal growth, and all these problems that we have in finance. So if we can actually show that crypto can solve student finance and make it better, then I think we have a winning use case that even your grandma can say, that's cool. So why do we tokenize student loans? Well, we know that Web3 is not just global liquidity, can provide better yield and provides more democratic access, creating lower costs for borrowers. So reduced interest rates, higher yield basically for the people who provide the lending on it, right? And I won't go into the specific details of the mechanism. You can learn more about it if you want to go to Open Campus. But very quickly, today, already 1 million student borrowers on the companies that have been incubated or are part of the Open Campus sort of accelerator, Erudify and Invested, have already provided financing to 1 million student borrowers as a platform. And of course, through this mechanism, we'll hope to basically grow the sort of lending pool even larger. This is in Southeast Asia, places like Indonesia and Philippines, but you can imagine what that could do for the rest of the world. And it's the kind of use case that I think we can be proud of in Web3, and we should be talking more about, because that's the way that we can bring more people onto Web3, because they can realize that there's real benefits that matter to them. So, thank you very much.